Well, this morning, the theme of our readings is the readiness of God to give us mercy. His sheer joy and the sheer joy of heaven upon our returning to Him. But amidst these readings, we have Psalm 51 and its plea for God's mercy. How many have heard the great piece of music that was inspired by Psalm 51, Gregorio Allegri's Miserere Mei Deus? How many have heard that? Anyone? A few folks. It's one of the most famous choral pieces in history, and if you haven't heard it, it's well worth listening to. There's a great version on YouTube by the 16. Again, it's Miserere Mei Deus, and the text for this wonderful piece of choral music is Psalm 51. If you haven't heard the Allegri, you've encountered Psalm 51 on Ash Wednesday, as it's usually chanted and recited during the service, because Psalm 51 forms the pattern of our penitence to God in Lent. And indeed, if we did daily prayer according to the Church of England's daily prayer book, Psalm 51 is the introit psalm. So it's a very formative psalm for our understanding of what it means to be penitent, to seek God's mercy. Why do we have Psalm 51 amidst these readings today? Well, quite simply, it's because although God is ready to give us mercy, we need to be ready to receive it. We need to prepare ourselves. We cannot receive God's mercy unless we first seek it, unless we see the need for it, unless we return to our Father. And this is what Psalm 51 does. It teaches us how to ready ourselves for the ever-ready mercy of God. So what must we do to receive God's mercy? And what happens to us when God gives us His mercy? That's what I'd like to reflect on with you this morning. So first, how do we receive God's mercy? The psalmist is clear. We must know and confess our sins. The psalm opens with, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your loving kindness. In your great tenderness, wipe away all my offenses." The first thing the psalmist does when he seeks the mercy of God is recognize and acknowledge his wickedness. The psalmist has gone past the point of making excuses and rationalizing his bad behavior. He's not looking at his failures or his sin and saying, "Yeah, but look at all the other good things that I do." Or, "Well, I'm not that bad of a person. Look at that guy over there. He's way worse. This misbehavior is just a fluke." Or, "Well, if I had a better job, maybe I'd be more patient and I'd be less prone to this bad behavior. Or if these other people would be just a little bit nicer to me, then maybe I would be nicer in return." He's past the point of excusing himself. He says he has been wicked from his mother's womb, and he makes no excuses, but recognizes that God is justified in His judgment. So this is the first step, recognizing the need for God's mercy and ceasing to excuse our failures. You see, sometimes we don't really want the mercy of God. We might pray for it, but we really don't want it deep down. Sometimes feeling sorry for ourselves is what we substitute for God's mercy. Sometimes it's more comfortable to blame our circumstances or others than it is to confess our sins. Sometimes we like being angry more than we like being forgiven. We want to stay as we are. We want to keep thinking that we are not that bad. We don't want to admit that we are contributing to the problems of this world. We don't want to stop blaming others for our failures. Quite simply, we don't want to change. And sometimes within this, we can be given to an unhealthy self-pity. We can wallow in a woe is me mentality. We can see ourselves only as a victim of some kind of great conspiracy or unfortunate set of circumstances. And we can begin to feel that our situation is hopeless. And so what's the point of changing? And we might start to trick ourselves into thinking that we can escape our failures if we just change our circumstances, our friends, our co-workers, or whatever else it might be. But if we are to receive the mercy of God, we need to see the need for it. We need to see where we have gone wrong. If we won't admit we are wrong, then we won't really be seeking God's mercy, only God's permission. And God cannot permit dishonesty or evil. But not only must we recognize our sin, we must know them, the psalmist says. We must understand them. The psalmist says he knows his sins and they are always on his mind, or they are ever before him. He says he recognizes that God desires truth or honesty or sincerity in the inward being. And so if he is to be honest before the Lord, he must truly understand who he is, the bad as well as the good. And so we likewise need not just to be aware of our faults, but we have to understand them. We have to see the patterns of behavior that lead us into temptation. We have to recognize how our sins hurt God, others, and ourselves. We have to know the effects of our actions. So the psalmist says we must know ourselves. We must be sincere or truthful in our inward being and keep ourselves mindful of our sin so that we can, in a sense, see it coming and know how to avoid it or know when to seek the mercy of God. Now, this is very difficult and painful work. No one likes to do this. This is why we often try to evade it in various ways. But the psalmist forces us to see that our experience of God's mercy demands it. For as it is often said, we have to know the problem before we can receive the solution. And like the prodigal son, we have to acknowledge that we have gone astray before we can return home to the Father. Now, it's at this moment that the glory and mercy of the gospel shines through. For the moment we make this movement of being honest, of being truthful, of being penitent, God and all heaven rejoices, we read. God runs out like the father in the parable and greets us with open arms and has mercy upon us. God is eternally ready to receive us. He is eternally ready to be merciful. We need only ready ourselves. And once we do, God meets us in His mercy. But what happens to us when we receive God's mercy? What happens to us when we experience the mercy of God? Well, the psalmist ends with this idea of God creating in us a clean heart and renewing our spirits. What is a clean heart or a renewed spirit? When we speak about the heart or the spirit, we are talking about this fundamental sense of who we are, our identity. We are talking about the kind of inner narrative that runs and runs throughout every moment of our lives, explaining our own behavior to ourselves and explaining the behavior of others or the events that we encounter in the world. We are speaking about ourself. And when God's mercy breaks in, this inner narrative is interrupted. What happened in the past does not have to define what we do today. I don't have to live in a merely reactive way to things. I don't have to let yesterday's failures repeat themselves. I don't have to let my relationship with someone else be defined by the breakdown we've had. God's mercy renews my spirit. I can face the next day afresh. I can look at a person with whom I've had a falling out with mercy, and I can look for opportunities to make amends. God's mercy cleanses our hearts of all the hurts, of all the anger, of all the malice, of all the pride, of all the disappointments and frustrations, and it wipes the slate of history clean. It brings about in us a new spiritual outlook. A spiritual outlook toward the world that is not dominated by the frustrations and failures of yesterday, but is alive to the opportunities for restoration in the present and in the future. This is what we have to look forward to when we seek the mercy of God. A renewed spirit, a renewed outlook, a refreshed soul, a life that is opened up to the love of God, an opportunity to write a new story, a new inner narrative. God's mercy makes us new. And so let us seek the powerful, wonderful mercy of God.